The purpose of this section is to show you that the US government has radically shifted the rules during times of emergency, and that our monetary system is really a lot younger than you might think. After the panic of 1907, when private banker J.P. Morgan intervened as the lender of last resort, banks began agitating for a government solution. What was finally decided upon in 1913 was a federally sponsored cartel called the Federal Reserve, which sounded governmental, but really was not. The stock of the Federal Reserve was to be held by its member banks, not the US government, nor the public, which remains the case today. So what we call the Federal Reserve actually is a federally sponsored banking cartel, licensed to lend money into existence. By the 1930s, a federally reserve-fueled speculative bubble had burst, resulting in numerous bank failures, which shrank the money supply by nearly a third in 3 years. Despite being chartered as a lender of last resort, the Federal Reserve failed to halt a catastrophic banking collapse. In 1933, newly elected President Franklin D. Roosevelt decided to counter the falling money supply in the most drastic manner. To accomplish this, he confiscated all privately held gold.
So what I'll do is, let's just watch the video. I'll give you just a 1 minute, kind of get your highlights. So kind of be thinking through the video. If you want to jot down some notes of something you thought was interesting, but this would be a little bit different spin on the history of the Fed and where the gold standard came from.
It immediately devalued the US dollar. Prior to the seizure, it took approximately $21 to buy an ounce of gold, and afterwards, it took $35. Soon after, contractual obligations of the US government, such as bonds payable in gold, were nullified with the approval of the Supreme Court. This goes to show how governments in a period of emergency can change rules and break their own laws. All of the seized gold either ended up in the vaults of the Federal Reserve or at the International Monetary Fund or on the books of the Federal Reserve. A grand total of $11 billion was exchanged for all 261 million ounces of the nation's gold. In other words, complete control of the gold supply of the most powerful and prosperous nation on earth was exchanged for $11 billion printed out of thin air, creating some very serious storage hardships for the Federal Reserve. I mean, have you ever tried lifting 70-pound gold bricks that high over your head? In any event, to end the turmoil of depression and war, and to provide a foundation for global recovery, a conference was held at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire in 1944, with all the major Allied powers attending. Recognizing that the US then represented nearly half of the global economy, the US dollar was made the global reserve currency. All other currencies had fixed rates of exchange to the dollar, which in turn was redeemable for gold at $35 per ounce. The Bretton Woods II system ushered in a period of prosperity and rapid economic recovery. But there was a flaw in the system. Nothing in the Bretton Woods Agreement prevented the US Federal Reserve from expanding the supply of Federal Reserve notes. As this happened, the gold backing behind each dollar steadily declined, such that there was not enough gold to back all of the dollars. Meanwhile, as the Vietnam War intensified, the US was running budget deficits and flooding the world with paper dollars. The French, under President Charles de Gaulle, became suspicious that the US would be unable to honor its Bretton Woods obligations to redeem their excess dollars into gold. As the French exchanged their surplus dollars for gold, the US Treasury's gold stocks declined alarmingly. Finally, President Nixon declared force majeure on August 15, 1971, and slammed the gold window, ending its dollar convertibility. That's what governments do during wartime, and the US followed the pattern perfectly. But this time, it affected the whole world because the removal of gold convertibility of the dollar destroyed the foundation of the Bretton Woods system. Without a gold backing, there was no hard physical limit to how many paper dollars could be issued. Since we now know that all dollars are backed by debt, what do you suppose happened to US debt levels once the externally applied rigor of gold was removed? Let's find out. This is a chart of US federal debt from the period of 1949 to 2004. Note that it looks like any other exponential chart we've already reviewed, but especially note that the graph turns the corner shortly after Nixon slammed the gold window. That is, when Nixon removed the last vestige of external physical restraint from the system. And also note how rapidly the debt levels have climbed recently. These past few years have seen the highest, most rapid accumulation of federal debt in our entire history, thanks in large measure to an experiment never before attempted in our country's history, the conduct of 2 foreign wars and attacks.
Just want to point out, here's 2004, and notice we're at like, whatever, 9, 10 trillion. Anybody know what it is now? 2024?
Yeah, didn't you say 24 trillion?
Yeah, and it's actually higher than our GDP, so we're at 30 trillion now. So 30 trillion is where we're at today. If we fast forward 20 years and add a couple more bars onto this, I can't remember when this was produced, but all right, we'll go.
But at the same time, this rapid accumulation of debt is not a mysterious process at all. Rather, it's an entirely predictable consequence of the slamming of the gold window. How much longer can this continue? Unfortunately, there's no good answer to this besides, as long as foreigners let us. A second predictable and related consequence concerns the total amount of money in circulation. Remember, all money is loaned into existence, so the shape of the federal debt chart should tip you off to the shape of this next chart of US money from the years 1959 to 2007. The first thing we can note here is that it took our country over 300 years from the very first pilgrim until 1973 to generate our first $1 trillion of money stock. Every road, every bridge, every marketplace on every corner of every town, every boat, and every building, from the first colony until 1973, required $1 trillion in money stock. Our most recent $1 trillion, that was created in the last 4.5 months. My questions to you are these. What will it be like to live here when our nation is creating $1 trillion every 4 weeks? How about every 4 days? What about every 4 hours? 4 minutes? Where does this stop if not in hyperinflation and the destruction of the dollar, and by extension, our nation? If we view these events on a timeline, we can see that the Federal Reserve was formed in 1913, and that only 20 years later, in 1933, our country had entered a form of bankruptcy and had turned over its collective gold supply under force of law to the Federal Reserve. 11 years after that, the US dollar was enshrined as the world's reserve currency with an explicit backing by gold. That was unilaterally removed by Nixon 27 years later. In effect, the current global monetary system of unbacked currencies is now only 37 years old. It was not planned, but simply emerged out of crisis. The unredeemable US dollar remains a popular reserve currency as a matter of convenience, but nothing requires or guarantees that it will retain this role. Only the US is able to use its eroding reserve currency status to borrow and print dollars to pay for its trade deficits. However, as the dollar loses its reserve currency status from this abuse, the US will be forced to either export more to pay for its imports, or to take on ever heavier levels of debt. If these actions cause the dollar to keep falling, other countries will be tempted to devalue their currencies to keep pace and remain competitive. The potential for an inflationary period is evident, which brings us to the next section.
All right.
Most people have no clue that in 20...
Okay, so just write down a couple of interesting points that you found from that, and then I'll collect them in a minute here. So you got 1 minute to write that stuff down. Write down something.
Before we move on to 23, require...
Just some interesting points that you learned from the video. Pass them into the middle. Okay. No what? Just ask me for a piece of paper. You need every point you can get. Everybody needs every point they can get in this class. This could be the point that's a grade changer for you. Because I do keep track. People get benefits, all you guys getting these extra credit points. This can be a grade changer for you. That's why I appreciate you being here on time and in class. Everybody who's not here doesn't get it. These are easy points. If you haven't figured it out, I don't really look at these that closely. It's mostly to do attendance and reward you for being here. All right, I need the last papers here. That's it. Final call. Got everybody's? All right, so, a lot of things we talked about in class. This video is actually more informative than I even remembered. I haven't shown it for a while. And what'd you guys write? Let's see. Ahmad, you're the first one up here. What'd you write?
They use the gold for kind of like the currency.
Yeah.
And then they just change it. When Nixon did with regulations. So
Yeah.
They didn't know what is the value of the dollar from because they used to value it by the gold.
Yeah, good. Give me a number between 3 and 8.
4.
1, 2, 3, 4. Arthur, what'd you write? Yeah, so they confiscated the gold. So you guys think about this. All the gold, it was illegal for you to own gold in the United States. You had to turn it over to the Treasury. They paid you for it, but they were collecting all the gold. So gold was basically confiscated in a sense. I mean, this is most people don't know this history of the United States with money. And so they have control of the gold, and then we enter into these other agreements. So, Tim?
Did they buy it for a good price? Right.
Yeah, so it was set at $35 an ounce, which was a good price at the time. So it was definitely at least a fair market price, yes.
I would consider this the U.S. government stole because
Yeah, I think that's a good word.
Yeah, Because even at that good price, people would be unwilling to do it, but by making it illegal and coercing them,
Yeah.
it's dishonest.
Yeah, it was done by force. I mean, it's not much different than taxes. I mean, they basically forced the gold standard to say, gold is money and we're gonna use these things now. Don't worry, you guys, you own gold. It can always be converted. We're gonna give you this piece of paper and it's always convertible into gold. Trust me, right? And so that's what it was, and you saw in the video how that trust was ultimately broken because the government saw an easy way to kind of print money and basically ended up devaluing it. And I thought it was interesting that France was the one suspicious that, hey, this isn't working the way we thought. That was after the Bretton Woods Agreement. So the idea was all other currencies were tied to the dollar, and the dollar was tied to gold. So that was what was different. When this thing started off, it was just the American dollar that was tied to gold, right? It was just our country was tied to gold. And then they changed it to this Bretton Woods. This was kind of the phase 3. And then finally abused it again to where the point was Nixon says, we're not making it convertible gold anymore. Sorry, you're out. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you like the idea of making it?
What?
Do you like the idea of having gold standard?
Yes, because it handcuffs the part of what the government does with printing money. It's a constraint, so they don't like it. I used to say I didn't believe in the gold standard because I thought my fellow economist in the Fed could always do some stuff to offset. We'll get into this a little bit into the next chapter and the rest, but if the President of the United States does some dumb stuff, like cash for clunkers that Obama did, for instance, back in 2008. I mean, this goes across party lines. I mean, presidents doing dumb things, Congress passing dumb laws. So basically, expansionary fiscal policy. Then my fellow esteemed economists that are smarter could always do restrictive monetary policy to offset or neutralize the dumb stuff that President and Congress are doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That was my belief before, and I'm like, oh yeah, we don't. Oh, thank goodness we can have the Fed will can offset some of the dumb stuff that fiscal policy might do. But now I see them working too closely together, and I don't think that's healthy anymore. So I think a constraint of some sort would be nice. Justin?
There was a word there that I didn't even know. It's the one just for Nixon slams the gold window. He used a specific word. He's like forced. Started with a V. I wrote it down, but I don't remember.
Oh, you wrote it down?
Yeah.
Well, see me after class if you want to discuss it, but he basically just said, we're not converting it to gold anymore. And so it was just off, and now it's the system that we have today that we talked about called fiat currency. There's nothing backing it, right? Just, again, it says in God we trust on here because we can't trust the government completely. We better be mindful of some of the policies, and that's why I try to champion you guys. Maybe this is your last econ course that you'll ever take, but to be mindful of that some of these policies, if you start hearing some things that are going to change, and maybe at least be aware that let's not just kind of be complacent going through, that you can be a little bit more educated than the average Joe. And the biggest, scariest one right now that you should be anti-against is digital currency. So having no more paper currency, everything's digital. And for you young generation, you're like, oh, of course, I already am all digital, right? And you think that's great. Or some people, and not you maybe specifically, you've already picked up my anti-ness to this, but that will just further empower the Fed and the tracking of you and your expenses. And if they think you're eating too much high cholesterol meals, all of a sudden your digital currency won't work to buy cholesterol meals. And you don't have one of these to go buy around the back corner to buy a high cholesterol French fries and hamburger. And I'd say that as, somewhat kind of a joke, but it's not really a joke, right?
China does it.
And China does some of this stuff already, so we can kind of look at China's lead on shaping the culture and building the perfect society. I mean, it's been done before, and everybody knows Hitler Germany was pretty bad news. That was this is how regimes can change and control. And I think America will never get there, by the way. I'm not a big conspiracy theorist type of person. I think we've got enough going on. But everything just kind of heads that direction, right, with more power. So we need to cling on to any freedoms we have, like with paper currency, cling to them and own them and fight for them. That's an important one with monetary policy, is all I would leave that at. Questions or comments? One last one?
Let's say for whatever reason the gold standard returns, like tomorrow. What would the immediate effects of that be?
You probably wouldn't even notice a lot of the immediate effects. Some people would be, changing their behavior a little bit because of, why are they changing it back to gold? And maybe some people would be hoarding this or that, a few more doomsday preppers, that sort of thing going on. But I don't think it would have a major impact. It was just be moving forward. The Federal Reserve wouldn't have as much power as they did before. And that's what that graph kind of showed as well. Oh, it is my hand. All right, so let me show you a couple more things from this chapter, and then we'll continue on. There are just things that I wanted to show on the screen rather than the whiteboard here. All right, it's this one. So part of this chapter is talking about monetary policy and saving rates and all of that. And so yesterday we looked at the loanable funds market and the money market. And towards the end of the chapter, they talk about demographic changes that can really influence things. And this was really a contributing factor to being low interest rates, in addition to what maybe the Federal Reserve was doing. The change in the population, are people living longer or shorter lives? Let me start there in general from 20 years ago. Longer, right? So we got healthcare technology and all of that stuff, and we're a fairly wealthy country, of course. And so what this shows is, what is that going to impact, like the interest rates? And so when we go to the loanable funds market, who is our primary saver that we've been talking about? Gray-haired people or non-gray-haired people? Gray hairs. So we got a bunch of older households. So we say households, but really, young people like you and 20-somethings and 30-somethings, you're still borrowing, right? You're demanding loanable funds for cars or houses. Rarely are you paying cash unless you took my personal finance class and learned the values of paying with cash, and now you're paying cash with cars. So, but you're an oddball if you are, right? So most of who we have up in the savings are older households. So let's put older, whatever that means, right? And then here, of course, we have governments and businesses and other people here. But the main thing I want to drive home is that these demographic changes over time with the interest rates, if the fraction of the population is getting older and older, right? So as the baby boomers, these are the World War II mom and dad hook up after the war and make lots of babies, right? So the people born in the 40s and 50s, late 40s and 50s, that's kind of our baby boomer generation. So we had this big influx of people that were moving through the system. And at that time, maybe life expectancy was 65, and now it's like 85, right? So we have that large group of people that's changing the dynamics and the fraction of older people in the United States. And so as soon as these people start hitting age 50 and 60 and 70, they start to not have any more debt anymore, and they are plunking away for retirement in big ways. So what happens to the supply of loanable funds when we have a large group of people that are saving more money. Tim?
It goes up.
It goes up. So what does that mean? To the shift to the right or to the left?
Shift to your right.
To the right? Is that what you said, or left? I couldn't hear. So are we shifting up or are we shifting? I like to think of this stuff as right and left. So
Shift to the right.
shift to the right if we're saving more money. So think of it this way. In the United States, at an interest rate of 6%, there was a certain amount of loanable funds. And now at 6%, because we have more and more 50, 60-year-olds coming in, they want to save more, even at 6%. If it was 3%, they're going to be saving more. If it was 10%, they're going to be saving more. And so the supply of loanable funds has moved to the right because of these demographic changes. What happened to interest rates? What's your prediction? If there's an increase in this demographic and an increase in supply, interest rates going up or down here from 6?
Down.
Down. So the new equilibrium point, we're basically moving from A to B. That's bringing interest rates down maybe to 4%. Okay, so interest rates being low was a factor that changed lending behavior. So now we've got more people at lower interest rates. Businesses want to borrow more money. Households want to buy bigger houses. Fancier cars, whatever you want to think of here. We have more loanable funds at lower interest rates. And the government can enjoy borrowing at lower rates as well, because they have to offer these bonds. So we learned that they demand loanable funds because they don't charge enough taxes to pay for their spending, and so they have to write a bunch of these, right? Which means they have to pay interest. And now interest rates are low, and people in the government especially are like, oh, well, we might as well borrow. We don't have to increase taxes. Interest rates are so cheap anyway, right? So this incentive of low interest caused some different things to change over time that we've seen in some of this evidence on government debt and savings rates and other things. So what this picture does now is shows you the ratio of the population age 50 to 75 divided by the population under 50. So here we got 50 to 75 years old divided by less than 50, divided by you guys. So what is that? You know, this is a ratio. And what do these numbers tell you, judging by this side here? Which one's bigger, the upstairs or the downstairs? If we have numbers in the 0.2 to 0.7 range, which one's bigger?
Right now, downstairs.
The downstairs is bigger. So the young people are dominating the old people. But what's happened over time? So here is the gold bar is 1970 and up to a projected level in 2030. And let's start with the United States. We've got this fraction taking a pretty big jump here once we get into the 2010 level. And then we actually came down a little bit. So we're sitting here at this level in the United States, but still a jump in that factor over the time. And then Japan, if you guys have read anything, they're like our oldest, longest living country in terms of the people there. They tend to be 100 years old, no big deal in Japan, right? They're living longer. And then we had France in here, maybe a little more similar to the United States. And the Italians live long, or projected to live even longer, right? So we've got this happening. The point with this is that it's not just happening in the United States, of course, it's happening around the globe. And so we have this large influx of people that are influencing interest rates as well. Okay, questions or comments there?
be concerning that the US is the only one that got smaller, or is projected to get smaller?
You know, I don't know what's driving that result, so I'm not concerned. I think people live long enough already, so I mean that's good. It'll be easier to control. I say that, of course, jokingly, but if you are, and it is just a fraction. So what it could mean is that we're making more babies than the rest of the world, right? So if and I don't know that, but I'm just saying that could be an answer just looking at the math, right? So if this gets bigger, we just cranked out some more kids or something. Immigration, you know, where do people want to go around the world? What's the most popular place? The United States. It's big headlines, right? So if we have more people coming to the United States that are less than 50 years old, that's going to drive it down too. So it could be various factors like that that play into it. So no, I wouldn't find it concerning. In fact, maybe it is a benefit that if that's the case, that this is growing, that could be a good thing. Because what happens when you have a society where there's a whole bunch of old people relative to the young people in terms of some of the government programs that we've been talking about?
Well, Germany's heading that way right now.
Germany, yeah, well, again, a lot of the world is heading that way. What's the problem, though, from a fiscal policy standpoint with the government when you have people that are older growing and people younger not growing? What's kind of the issue there? What's the government policy that deals with old people? Come on, you guys know this. What is a government program that helps the elderly? Social Security, right. So Social Security always has been a tax and transfer program from day one. So we always were taking from the young and giving to the old. That was the program from day one. So when Social Security started, which was during that 1930s time frame, it was one of the programs started, we had something like 30 young people supporting every old person, right? That makes sense? The young people, 30 young people pool their money together and help fund the old jigger, right? That was the plan. It's not a retirement plan like your 401k, where you're putting your money into the market and you are taking on some risk and you might lose it, but that money's there, you can cash out your money. That is not what Social Security is. It's always been take from the young, give to the old, right? A transfer program. Well, today, I think it's less than 3 now. 3 young people to every old fart. Right? So this is why it's going bust. Because we can't keep taxing 3 people instead of 30 people have to pay for that older person. And has healthcare costs gone up or down?
Up.
Way up, right? So I have an interesting chart somewhere that I've probably lost by now that shows the inflation rate, but then it shows healthcare rates of prices and college tuition, education rates. Those are all been higher than the average level of inflation. So if inflation's been 3%, healthcare and tuition, basically a lot of government-dominated industries have gone up like 5 or 10% per year on average. So those are accelerating. And so that's even worse that we have the industry that's going up in price and we have less and less young people to pay for the old people. And that's why it's looking to be bust by, I think 2038 is the latest projection. So yeah, thanks you guys for paying in for the system for, what are we in, 2024? You got 14 years left. Any of you planning to, I don't see a lot of gray hair in here. Anybody planning to be retired? Any of you 65 by 2038 so that you can collect your benefits? Well, you're gonna be paying in. And so then what are they going to do? Well, they're going to have to make some adjustments. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into some of our final chapters. All right, any other last questions about this? All right, so let's wrap up a little more supply and demand stuff. And then we'll move on to the next chapter. So yesterday, we left off with the quantity theory of money. So again, one of my favorite economists, Milton Friedman, brought this to light, and he basically said, look, let's think about the world this way. This year, the price of something times the quantity of something, the nominal GDP, the dollar value of all final goods and services this year, was purchased with money. So the quantity of money times the average number of times that money was spent. So this was called the equation of exchange. You guys have it in your notes from yesterday, so I'm not going to color it in with quite as much stuff here, but want to add one more important feature to this. So this was at a point in time, and it basically said, if this is fixed and this is fixed, it's going to be what it's going to be this year. Then if you jack this up 10%, this goes up by 10%, right? This by 13%, this by 13%. So the quantity theory of money asserts that changes in the inflation rate come from changes in the money supply, right? There's a one-to-one or a proportionate relationship anyway between money supply changes and inflation. So what about over time? So this is where I'm going to add on a few new stuff. Okay, so what about changes over time? So now we can use the rate of change formula. And so it's very close to what I wrote up here, but now when we think about the new year minus the old year divided by the old year, right? Same thing with what we've been doing. Well, now we've got the inflation rate, so the percentage change in the price level. Maybe I'll do this. Yeah, let me write this all out here a little bit. So we take the price level in 24 minus the price level in 23 divided by the price level in 23. That is inflation for 24. Plus economic growth, which would be GDP, real GDP in 24 minus real GDP in 23 divided by real GDP in 23, new number minus the old number, gives you the rate of economic growth. And then over here, we get the rate of change of the money supply. So the money supply in 24 minus the money supply in 23 divided by the money supply in 23 is the graph that guy showed you on the video of money supply growth. Growth rate in the money supply, determined by the Fed. Plus, then the velocity in 24 minus the velocity in 23 over the velocity in 23 would give you the rate of change of velocity. So this is how the formula turns out when you change it to a rate of growth. And so we get the inflation rate plus real economic growth, which is what economic growth is, but I'll just kind of emphasize that with real economic growth, equals money growth plus velocity growth. Okay, so now this one's a little bit different than what we did before because we know that the economy does grow over time, right? We have evidence of measuring real GDP over time and economic growth and all the great things that come from that. Now, velocity growth does not happen, so I didn't I'm not going to drop the screen again, but here's from your textbook. This red line is M2 velocity. The blue line is M1 velocity. And so I want you guys to kind of eyeball this paper as I walk down the aisles here. The red line is M2. The blue line is M1. So, is M2, the red line, changing much over time? Earbuds up, please. No. So if this number equals this number, let's just say it's 5 minus 5 divided by 5, what does this equal? 5 minus 5 is 0. 0 divided by 5 is 0. It disappears, right? And here's the evidence that it doesn't change much over time. So that gives us a different insight that we didn't have before on this. So note, since velocity doesn't change much, then velocity growth is basically approximately equal to 0. Which means, putting our equation goggles on, let's just kind of X this one off. Put a big X through it. Velocity growth is 0. So if we have real economic growth going on at 2 to 3% per year, let's just say 2% per year, do we need more money if there's more things to trade? So real economic growth means we have more beer, pizza, and chicken wings this year than we had last year, right? We have 3% more beer, pizza, and chicken wings this year. And so if we have more income, more wealth that's growing over time, then we would need more money to support those exchanges, in a sense, right? Or the flip side is if I keep money growth at 0, then what's going to happen to my inflation? So pretend this is 0. I'm pushing you guys a little bit on this, but imagine this is 0. Money, the Federal Reserve does not change the money supply, right? It's fixed. Which, by the way, the little teaser into Bitcoin. Bitcoin's not going to grow later as well. So the growth, there is no growth of Bitcoin once all the Bitcoins are out. So this is not completely a hypothetical here. So that's why I want you guys to see this. So if this one is 0, and this one's 3%, and this equation is true, 0, 3%, what does this one have to be? This side of the equation equals 0 now. So I've got this plus a positive 3% has got to equal 0. What does this need to be? Nadia? -3. And you might be looking like, what? So what do we call negative inflation? We haven't talked about it too much because it hasn't happened basically in the United States for a long, long time. Good, deflation. Who said that? Yeah, good, Justin. Deflation. So deflation is negative inflation, but prices are going down. Now, what's funny is people say, oh, this will be really bad if the economy experiences deflation. And I'm like, I don't know about you guys, but I like low prices. Our hamburger and french fries is now up to what, 12 bucks at freaking McDonald's? I think $8 sounds good to me. What's wrong with a little deflation? But people don't seem to be able to wrap their brains around that. And furthermore, the Federal Reserve and its proponents will be saying, oh, well, we don't want deflation to happen. Some bad things could happen. And I don't think it's true. There's arguments to be made of, well, people liked the idea that prices are constant or prices, aren't falling at least, or what are the entrepreneurs going to think if they can't think they could get higher prices? Well, that's totally untrue. So do we have situations where some prices are going down? Are VCRs pretty cheap right now? Yeah, 50 cents at a garage sale probably to buy a VCR, right? So VCRs are really cheap, but other things like iPhones and streaming devices and other things are higher prices. So when we look at the average rate of inflation over time, some prices are up, some prices are down, and the only thing that matters is one price relative to the other, right? Because it's really just showing our willingness to trade one good for the other and how we value it. And so I don't think negative inflation is a big deal. And I also think Bitcoin is going to be a major player here, what did I say, 7 years from now? And Bitcoin's going to there's going to be deflation if it becomes kind of the global currency, which is a long shot still at this point. So don't go buying up Bitcoin saying Dr. McCullough said Bitcoin's going to be the thing that makes you rich, because that would be fairly foolish. But I do own a little bit of Bitcoin. A little bit of my overall investments are in Bitcoin for the long term. I bought them 3 years ago because I made this prediction that I think 10 years from now it's going to be there. And it's looking kind of good now, but it was kind of looking this way before, and Bitcoin toppled back down to 20. I didn't buy any more though. I mean, I was happy with what I bought. That's the way I look at investing. I'm going to just go with my 10-year bet and see how I do at the end of it. All right, Tim.
So there will basically be deflation until the economic doesn't grow anymore.
Correct, yeah, that's right. The deflation would be matched with whatever's really going on with the economy, yeah. And so, by the way, if the economy actually shrank, which happens that's what a recession is, right? Real GDP going down, then that would cause a little bit of inflation, or at least would reverse itself, yeah.
So where would the standard be where it would balance out?
Well, I think if we had a stable current, so here's where this is getting deeper than we need to get. So I'm only going to say a quick answer, and then we can talk after class if you want. I think that if the Federal Reserve wasn't screwing around with the money supply, and if it was 0% or some other thing that constrained them more, we'd actually have more economic growth. I think it would remove some of the uncertainty in decision making, and it would be healthier for the economy to have less government involvement in the trades there. So, all right. So let me write that out, because that's an important thing that we've kind of come to here. So some key points. Maybe we'll write this with a little black so that we can see it really good. Okay. So let's say key points. Number one, if money growth equals 0%, like Bitcoin will be eventually. Again, that's a whole loaded topic. You can take my money in banking is coming up this fall. So if you guys want, I've talked to quite a few of you about being an econ major, but you don't have to be an econ major to take money in banking if you wanted to learn more about that. So, so if money growth equals 0%, then real economic growth equals inflation. And that, of course, implies positive growth of 3% implies inflation of negative 3%, which is deflation. And then we're going to put Russ likes low prices. thinks deflation under these circumstances, I gotta be careful now, this is being recorded too, under these circumstances is no big deal. So I would, by the way, have a lot of economists fighting me. I'd be in the minority of economists, I'm pretty sure. But that is the predictable result that we get with zero money growth. All right, so now the reality of zero money growth is next to nothing short of Bitcoin becoming a reality, which again is a long shot. So here's the real deal in terms of what many economists would support, and certainly I would support as better than the status quo, is number 2. So if money growth is I'm running out of room here. I guess I'll get rid of this. I want to set up. Except I'll keep that. All right, if money growth equals real economic growth, so if money growth is now set to real economic growth, then what would we expect inflation to be? I want you guys to catch up. And then look at this equation again. So now the Federal Reserve is going to have a policy that we are going to keep money growth equal to economic growth. And we may not be perfect at it, but that's gonna be the rule that we're gonna follow. If that's the case, if this one equals this one, what's inflation? 0, yes. So if money growth equals real economic growth, then inflation equals 0%. That's kind of a fun real world scenario. What if we just froze prices, right? On average, we don't have inflation as a factor anymore. So then inflation would be 0% over time. And this is known as a kind of a fixed, I don't know, fixed might be a fixed rule approach. And I actually, at the conference I just went to, talked to the economist who popularized this by John Taylor. And he developed something called the Taylor rule. And there's variations on this, but so I was in San Antonio at an economics conference and got the opportunity to listen to John Taylor talk. After the session, I went up there and I said, well, what do you think of interest rate on reserves? And he said he didn't like interest rates on reserves. And of course, he's been promoting this type of concept for a long time, that we could be at a better rate. Obviously, if we fix money growth at 2% over this, then inflation would be 2%, right? But it would stabilize and it would kind of, again, somewhat handcuff the Fed with discretionary policy. So it'd be not the gold standard. I think there's nobody that really believes we'd ever get back to a gold standard, but this could be a possible option, but it's probably unlikely as well because those in power would lose some power. Adios, see you tomorrow.